days when there was no king. Every man did what was right in his own eyes, but God raised up deliverers.
Welcome back to Teaching Through the Bible as we continue looking at Gideon in the book of Judges. Now again, the book of Judges, Yahweh is faithful to save his unfaithful people. We're in the middle of Judges. We have these two bookends about the unfaithful Israel, but we're focused on the bulk of Judges, which is the faithful Judges, part of this cycle, right? Evil. The Israelites turn to evil, their enemies take over them, they cry out because they're oppressed, and God sends a judge to defeat the enemy, to lead his people, and that judge is eventually rejected, more often than not. Even if they're not rejected in the moment, they're rejected in the sense that whatever they called Israel to do in following God, Israel turns right back away from that right afterwards. And so, we're talking about Gideon. We talked about how he was just like Moses. He was kind of his calling and this pattern of what happened. Like, this is all like Moses. He's this new Moses, but like Moses, he's not going to be enough, right? Moses is not there anymore. At some point, Gideon won't be there anymore. But not only is he kind of pointing back to Moses, him and Moses, what are they both doing? They're pointing forward to Jesus, right? Because all of the Old Testament, remember, all Old Testament points forward to Jesus. All New Testament points back to Jesus. And Moses pointed forward to Jesus. Gideon, yes, he's in the same vein as Moses, and that includes pointing forward to Jesus. And we're going to see that here today. Where we left off last time, Gideon was encouraged through some signs, and those were also especially meant for the people following Gideon, that they were going to see that he was truly the leader God had sent, and just as Moses got signs. And Yahweh gave victory to Gideon and to the men that came with him. God gave that victory. And we see that Gideon follows God and saves his people. But the people reject him. Does that sound like anyone else? Of course. Jesus, he followed the will of his Father. And yet, even though he did that, even though he had this mission to save his people and he succeeded in that, his people, immediately, they rejected him. They said, no thanks, we don't want it like this. Well, Gideon, he's defeating the enemy. He's going through and conquering the Midianites, chasing them away. Well, as he's chasing them away, what happens? He's rejected by Ephraim, Succoth, Penuel, his own son. All these people reject him. And that happens. We see, first of all, we see that Ephraim, they're rejecting him by just getting upset that they weren't part of the battle. So he's come and defeated the enemy, and they're like, well, why weren't we part of this? Like, okay, well, they're defeated, guys. Like, is this just that they wanted the credit? Like, oh, we want to be the ones that get the credit for it? And Gideon said, you know what? You guys did your own part when we started chasing them away, and you guys joined in, and you guys fought, and, you guys did awesome, and you guys take the credit. That's fine. Gideon diffuses that situation. But then, as he's chasing the enemy, he stops at Succoth. He stops then later at Penuel. And these towns, he says that he's looking for something to help his soldiers. They're exhausted. Just give them some food so they can get nourished and be able to continue on their way and chase down God's enemies. And these guys say, no, we're not helping you out because, here's just the worst reason, because what if you don't succeed? What if the guy that God sent to save us doesn't succeed, and those other people, they get away, and then they'll come back and they'll be harsh to us? Which, of course, you're already in that situation, right? That's the problem in the first place. And now they're saying, we don't want anything else coming back on us, so we're going to reject God's leader and say, just in case you don't succeed, God, we're not going to be part of this. We're not going to be part of your plan because we don't know that your plan is a great one. Sorry, God, not the best idea I've ever heard. So we're just going to kind of try to play both sides. And essentially, as they reject God's leader, they're siding themselves with the Midianites. They're turning away from God. They're rejecting him. They're rejecting his leader. And they're siding with the enemy. Which is important to notice that is what's happening, that they are siding with the Midianites, because that explains why Gideon responds the way he does. He says, hey, once I go and finish judging them, once I go and defeat that enemy that God has sent me to defeat, I'm going to come back and I'm going to deal with y'all. And he deals with them, what you may say, very brutally, taking the leaders and killing them. And that can seem really harsh, that he's killing the leaders. But why is he doing that? He's doing that because he's judging God's enemies, because they have decided they will be God's enemies. They have turned themselves into God's enemies, and now they also are subject to the judgment. But there's Ephraim, rejects Gideon. There's Sukkoth, rejects Gideon. There's Penuel, rejects Gideon. And then his own son. Gideon tells his son to defeat this enemy, the leader of the enemies. They've captured him, and he tells his son, go finish him off, and his son doesn't do it. It says because he's afraid and he's a young man. And that could be, sympathetic, and that might seem like, Gideon, why are you making him do this? But remember, we've seen people be afraid before, right? Everybody in this situation has been afraid at some point. Gideon's the only one who was afraid, but he trusted God. God used him to deliver God's people. His son, sure, he's afraid. Totally reasonable. He's a young guy. Maybe he hasn't been in war before. It's reasonable that he might be afraid. But you can't let that fear stop you from doing what God calls you to do. And Gideon, as God's man, has gone through the fear. He's been afraid, but he's gone through it. He's done what God called him to do anyways. And he's calling on his son to do the same, and his son rejects him. His son, nope, I'm going to give in to my fear. I'm going to do what is more comfortable for me. Now, I'm scared to do that. Instead of saying, yeah, I'm scared to do that, but this is the right thing and I need to do it. Throughout this whole narrative, we see fear. We see that people are afraid. Like the people in Sukkoth, they were afraid that the Midianites would come back and be harsher to them. But are you going to be on God's side? Or are you going to give in to the fear? And Gideon's the only one who says that he is afraid. It says he's afraid, but he does what God calls him to anyways. And everyone else just rejects God's leader. Just like Jesus was rejected when he followed his Father by all the people. And Gideon is rejected when he follows God by all the people. Jesus was even rejected by his own family. And here Gideon is even rejected by his son, his own family. They're both leaders sent to save God's people. They're both rejected, even rejected by their own family. And then we see that there's something after that, though. There's something that shows, even though he is like Jesus, even though Gideon is this representation, he's not Jesus. Falls short. We see that there's two things. There's an ephod that's part of the garments that the priests would wear. The high priest would wear this, that would help you be able to know what God wants. You can ask questions. There's these two kind of rocks or something in there. They take out for a yes or a no, like communicating to God through this, getting answers from him. And then we also see that Gideon had many wives. Now, the many wives one, clearly not what God calls us to do. go back and look at Genesis 1, Genesis 2, and those videos that I've done with that at the very beginning. But that was wrong. And just like David had many wives, wasn't good. Solomon had many wives, wasn't good. Moses, he may have had multiple wives as well. So this seems to be a recurring problem for God's leaders, that they're not good enough in a number of ways, and we are reminded that we need someone like Gideon, but we need someone better than Gideon, and that's Jesus. But then there's also, it mentions this ephod that he makes, and it's very easy to look at that and be like, hey, this was bad, this was a problem, you shouldn't have done this. They end up worshiping it, it becomes like an idol. But what is actually going on there? Because it's kind of unclear, and there's a few different ways for us to potentially understand this. Like, when you read this, what does it look like to you? Just think about, like, read this section. So chapter 8, verse 22 down to 28, and just a few verses. What does this seem to you is going on? Because it's possible he made something that was like pretty much immediately an idol, and he was worshiping it, and that's obviously just all bad. It's also possible, was he making this to be able to make sure he's still communicating with God? And maybe you could say his heart's in the right place, but it's wrong still. Sometimes we think we're doing something good, and it turns out, no, that was not right. We can think, hey, I'm doing this for God, and it's actually sinful. And there was a position, the high priest, that had this authority and had this thing that he was using to communicate with God, and that's not something that just anyone was allowed to do. And so if Gideon is doing that, then he may have had good intentions, and hey, I want to make sure that I'm still communicating with God, and I'm, like, if I'm going to be leading, like, I want to be able to always communicate with him. But obviously God's able to communicate with Gideon other ways. He's done that plenty before. And even if Gideon has the right mentality about it, you still got to do what God actually tells you to do, right? And God has given this thing to the high priest, not for Gideon to make his own one and do his own thing with. And Gideon's not even a Levite, much less a priest, much less the high priest. So potentially that's what's going on. So maybe this is just straight up bad. Maybe this is good intentions but still bad. Or perhaps this is like what maybe was going on with the 2.5 tribes. Manasseh being one of those, and he seems to have been from Manasseh. The half tribe of Manasseh and Gad and Reuben. Remember back at the end of Joshua, they go back across the river, but on their way back, what do? They make a big altar that's a replica of sorts of the one that's actually used to sacrifice to Yahweh. And they build it on the west side of the river before they cross back over east. And everyone's all in shock and terrified, like, God's going to judge us, like, what's going on? We can't have these people, making another altar and worshiping differently than what God says. But what was their response? The half tribe of Manasseh, the tribe of Gad, the tribe of Reuben, they said, no. We're not making this to use it as an altar. It's a replica that's a memorial, that is a reminder that we worship the same God as you guys, that we are part of you. We are in the same group. Even though there is this river splitting us up, even though the Jordan River separates us, same God. So that altar is not something we're planning on using as an altar. It's a picture, it's a reminder that we worship the same God. So we made it look the same because it's a reminder that we worship the same God, Yahweh. And perhaps here he is making a replica as a reminder for the people. And he does this, remember, right after he is asked to be their king. to rule over them. And he says, no, I'm not going to. What does he say? Gideon said to them, verse 23, I will not rule over you, and my son will not rule over you. Yahweh will rule over you. And then immediately after that, he makes the ephod. So I think most likely what's going on here is he is making a memorial, something for them physically to see, to be a reminder. To be a reminder of who is in charge, who is the true leader. Now, yes, Gideon was a leader. Gideon did lead those people, and that's all legit. He did that as God's representative that God had sent. And that was for a time, but this was not a situation where he was now going to be king and it was going to be, passing down like a dynasty being created of him being king and the son being king. He's saying, nope, that's not what we're doing here. God sent me in this capacity for this time, but he's the one in charge. I'm not the one in charge of you guys ultimately, and you need to remember that. Which is, again, that's great. He's pointing everyone to God. He's pointing everyone to the true king. And of course, Jesus does the same, right? Jesus points us to himself because he is the true king. But he is making sure that that all the focus goes in the right place. And now, unfortunately, with Gideon, we see that they do end up, it says in verse 27, and all Israel whored after it there. And so everybody's focus is supposed to go to God, and it goes to the thing that's supposed to remind them of God instead. And that may seem like it's easy to say, well, you know what, Gideon shouldn't have made it, if that was what's going to happen. But if that's the case, then we got to say that what Moses did was wrong too, because Moses, if you remember in the book of Numbers, he made a bronze serpent, right? God had sent a judgment on the Israelites. All these snakes biting them, right? And then what happens though? God tells Moses, he tells him to do this. There's no way, this is not the right thing to do. God's telling him, make this bronze serpent, put her on a pole, and everyone can look to that and be healed. And this was, again, pointing us to Jesus. Well, here, it could be the same kind of thing. The ephod is made as something that's supposed to remind them of their true leader, of God as their king, and instead they illegitimately take that and turn it into an idol. Just like, actually, that bronze serpent that Moses made, later on in the Bible we find out, they started worshiping that too. They turned that into an idol. And so one of Israel's kings later on destroys it because it had been turned into an idol. So Moses made it, and it was legitimate for him to make it, but they still ended up worshiping that instead of the one who it pointed to. Same thing here. The ephod was made, I think, legitimately, and then points to the one they're supposed to worship, but instead they worship it. And so that's where we're going to end with Gideon, because then he dies, and he does not continue to lead them. And here, again, we can see more of how Gideon was faithful and was leading God's people, because, remember, he's already pointed them to Jesus, to God. I will not rule over you, my son will not rule over you, Yahweh will rule over you. And then what happens as soon as he dies? Were they already in sin and just following all these evil things, and Gideon has led them into this or something like that? No, verse 33, as soon as he died, so after he's dead, the people of Israel turned again and whored after the Baals and made Baal-berith their god. When Gideon died, they turned to other gods. They turned away from Yahweh. So he was directing them towards Yahweh, and they rejected him, and they rejected Yahweh, and as soon as he was out of the picture, they're right back to where they started. Thank you for watching that video. I hope that it helped you learn a little bit more about the Bible today. And if you'd like to continue to learn more about the Bible, then we have plenty of other videos on the channel. And if this has been helpful for you, then you can always let me know by subscribing to the channel. And hopefully I'll be able to continue to help you learn even more about God's Word. Thanks.